There are also some interesting issues out there, and one of them, and this reappears on this show constantly, and it always surprises me. Or it doesn't always surprise me. Actually, I guess it makes a certain amount of sense that people would think that way. People call up and they say, we need term limits. These bums have been in there too long, and of course that was the Republican mantra going on the third and certainly the fourth presidency of Franklin Roosevelt. Professor Jonathan Zimmerman is on the line with us. He's a professor of education and history and the director of the History of Education Department at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education and Human Development at New York University. And Steinhardt, steinhardt.nyu.edu is the website. And Professor Zimmerman, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. You have written a piece basically saying, let's go back to the way it was before, by and large, the Republicans established term limits after the Roosevelt presidency, the Franklin Roosevelt presidency. Tell us about that.
Well, I want to go back to the Founding Fathers. Mm-hmm. And the Founding Fathers debated this question quite vehemently. And obviously there were strong opinions on both sides, but they decided not to limit it constitutionally, and I think that they were right. And their major argument was that it removes, power from the voters, and it also takes away the incentive, they thought, for what Governor Morris of New York called good behavior. Why should the president behave in accord with the popular will if the populace is not going to be voting thumbs up or thumbs down on him?
Of course, at the time of those debates, there were not well-developed political parties. And you could argue that now
there was lots of partisanship. Right?
No, but my point is that you could argue that right now, if President Obama were to suddenly just go off in some totally weird direction as a lame duck president, that it would cause so much harm to the Democratic Party that he would be restrained by that. And that was not something that was anticipated at the time of the Constitutional Convention. In fact,
that's actually a really interesting point. I mean, I think that there's something to that, but I would also say that, one of the problems with term limits, to use the word restraint, is it takes away some restraint on the governing party or the members of it to line up behind the president. And I think that we've seen that in recent months. Look, when the president and John Kerry announced their Iran deal, you can expect people like John McCain to object. But if Obama wasn't term limited, would Bob Menendez and Chuck Schumer be objecting? I don't think as loudly. And the reason is that, he, the president, would remain their standard bearer. And in a certain way, once he's term limited, he isn't.
Yeah. No, I actually totally agree with your position. And I have said on this program numerous times that I have two problems with term limits. One, we already have them. They're called elections. And two, and this probably has more to do with Congress than with the presidency, but I do think that there is some element of this that you see in the presidency, and we certainly saw in the third term of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, and that is that there is when somebody comes newly into an office, they kind of stumble around for a while, and there needs to be the wise elders who have been there and have been around who can kind of help them. And I guess in the role of the president, there isn't so much of that. But in Congress, if we were to term limit Congress, and this is what we've seen in the various states where the House and Senates are term limited, that permanent infrastructure, that the wise elders who show people where the levers of power are, ends up being the lobbyists.
Absolutely. I think that there's this very naive idea that if we term limit people, that somehow, they'll be more beholden to the people and less beholden to lobbyists. But I think at the state level, there's some evidence suggesting that it's precisely the inverse.
Right. So when exactly, forgive my not having looked this up in my little pocket Constitution here, when exactly did we amend the Constitution to term limit the presidency, and what was involved in it?
In 1947, there was a huge Republican majority in Congress which voted in favor of the amendment. But, of course, to amend the Constitution, you've got to send it to the states that have to ratify it. So it wasn't ratified until 1951, near the end of Harry Truman's presidency.
Wow. And at that point, there was nobody who seriously thought Truman was going to be running for a third term, was it?
No, but it's interesting that as soon as the Republicans won this, and it really was a Republican maneuver, every single Republican member of Congress voted for the 22nd Amendment. straight party line vote. Right. And the Democrats who supported it were really Democrats that had broken with FDR and the New Deal. It really was a referendum on Roosevelt. But what's fascinating is that as soon as the Republicans win it, some of them start to doubt it. And the doubters include, yes, Dwight David Eisenhower.
Right.
On the eve of being reelected in 56, obviously for the last time, because now that the amendment is kicked in, he's term limited. Eisenhower makes a statement. I'm going to quote it directly because I just wish all the term limit doubters would listen to this. He said, this is Eisenhower, the United States ought to be able to choose for its president anybody it wants, regardless of the number of terms he has served. I have got the utmost faith in the long-term common sense of the American people. I take the Eisenhower position.
Yeah, I agree with it. The flip side of that, though, is the Berlusconi situation. I mean, what do you do? We arguably no longer have a constitutionally limited democratic republic. We have a constitutional monarchy. The Supreme Court, through the doctrine of judicial review, Marbury versus Madison, they have taken onto themselves more power than any of the monarchs of Europe. The Queen of England does not have the power to strike down laws or to establish policy like money is speech and corporations are persons. Is it not inconceivable that now that money is speech, that somebody like Silvio Berlusconi, who owned more than 90% of all the media in Italy, could ascend to the presidency and then use that wealth and power to become a perpetual president?
Look, it's not impossible, but I think the answer to that lies in creating a new system for the way that we hold and pay for elections. Right. The answer is not to tie our hands behind our back prima facie and say we can't vote for X person or we can only vote twice.
No, I agree with you, but I don't see that. The Supreme Court is not going to let that happen.
It's an absolutely central one for our democracy, but I don't think the answer to the problem of democracy is less democracy.
Right. I agree. So really, the problem that I've identified is money in politics, and which I'm pointing to the Supreme Court with that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. And I think that our politics is broken because of the influence of big money. Yeah. But term limits is not a reasonable solution to that problem.
Right. I agree. I think this effort to move to amend.org, to amend the Constitution to get around the Supreme Court's assertion that the money is protected by the First Amendment and the corporations are protected by the 14th Amendment seems like at least a starting point. But
possibly so, but at the end of the day, we the people have to give ourselves maximal decision-making power, and the way to do that is to allow ourselves to vote for anybody that we'd like.
Amen. Okay. Professor Jonathan Zimmerman, Professor of Education and History and Director of the History of Education Program. Hang on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education and Human Development at New York University. Thank you, Professor, for being with us.
Thank you. It was fun.